So hello again, everybody. Hello and welcome again to this WANASEA third webinar. Congratulations to all of you. You have been selected for WANASEA's third training session that is going to take place next week in Phnom Penh at ITC. I'm gonna remind you again its title. It was Implementing Research, Methodological and Management Challenges. Today we have two guests with us. I'm gonna introduce them in 1 or 2 minutes. Before doing that, I'm gonna remind to all of you the rules. The first one is, unfortunately, to keep the mics shut so that everyone can listen to the speakers actually. When you'll have questions, please write them directly on the chat so that everyone can see them and actually so that the speakers can answer later. What I have to say also is that this webinar is going to last for 40 minutes. If we need more time, I'm gonna open another room and send you all another link so we can keep on talking if needed. That's it for today. I don't want to say more. So in 1 minute, I'm gonna pass the mic and invite our speakers to talk. The idea today is just to give you some short words on the research project life. What is it again? Reminding you what is it, how it works, and focusing on the impact, the concept of the impact. If you have any question, please write it down. If something is not clear, we can talk about it today, but also next week in Phnom Penh. So that is it. So today we're happy. I'm going to open their mic. We're happy to invite Mireille Razavindrakut and we're happy to listen to them actually and to listen to their experience from high-level researchers actually. So I'm going to put you as speakers right now. Nommé animateur. Yes. You know you have the mic. I'm going to cut my own mic and you can put the PowerPoint that we tried yesterday. Welcome.
Yeah.
Okay. So hello, everybody. We are just trying to share the screen and put the slides at the same time. We share it and.
Partager l'écran. Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
Okay. So we have it. Great. Hello, everybody. Maybe just a few words to recall. You have you already have our CV, but just a quick reminder. François and I are researchers from IRD, the French Research Institution for Development. We are specialized in development economics, especially on labor market issues and governance issues. And if we have time, we can tell you more about our type of research and give an examples of type of impact we have from our research. But maybe let me already just go straight away into the presentation, and then we will have maybe time to.
Sorry.
Yes. I have to speak louder. Okay. Okay. It's okay like this?
Yeah.
Okay. So today we will talk about the implementation of research. A quick reminder, you are supposed to have already a session on the genesis of research and the project design. So we are supposed to, in the implementation, in the different steps in when we implement a research, we are supposed to know already the global objectives, the needs and the demands, and globally the project design, the time frame, we get funds. And so the focus of this webinar session is really on how to implement a research in order to maximize the impact. So we talk about first, the main steps could be to think of the first diagnosis of the situation, to have a literature review. We have to have in mind human and financial resources management, question of ethics, intellectual property, and the field work, how to manage, how to manage the data collection and the field work in order also to think already of the impact. And then the last step is the concrete analysis of the data and the reporting. And of course, there will be another session later on dissemination of results, but we have already to have in mind the fact that all we have to do during this implementation phase, we have already to think about the dissemination, how we will disseminate the results of the research. So I show these charts. It's a little bit complicated. You don't have to go into details. This is just an example at the left of the slides. This is just an example, and the idea is to show that every steps of when we implement research, every steps are interlinked, and we have to keep in mind and to see the research globally. When we are the methodological phase, the first phase, we have already to think about how we will disseminate it. What will be the analytical phase? So globally, we can say that we have 3 steps when we implement a research. The first phase is a methodological one. This phase is when we make the first diagnosis of the situation, the literature review to see what are the existing research already. We don't begin from scratch, we begin from somewhere. There we find also the methodology we have already defined during the design of the project, the scope, the unit of observation, the different category, the sampling design, the questionnaire, if you have to implement a survey, for example. Then let's say we can call it a technical phase. It's the second phase. Then there we have the field work, data collection, for example. Here we have to think of how to use also, before using the data, we have to clean it, to make it usable. And the first exploratory analysis, first results, the field when we have also to discuss it with different persons. I will get back to this. And the third phase is concretely the analysis, interpretation of the first results, and the discussions with different participants of the project, and more in-depth analysis. So we have this global 3 phases, but the main message is that when we implement a research, the idea is not to, when we have at the methodological phase, not to think about the third one. We have already to anticipate. And I would like to stress 3 main conditions at this stage. If we want, and when we implement our research, the 3 main conditions we have in mind at the beginning of the implementation phase is to think of the context and to have to consider that we have to have an in-depth knowledge of the context of the country to make the research the more relevant as possible, the most relevant as possible. The second condition is to think of the constraints, the human and the financial resources, because we have to adapt the methodological phase, we have to adapt the methodology to the constraints, the funds, but also the human resources, in order also to have some research which can be reconduct later, and in order to make it usable. And the third condition is that you have to think also of the partnership. We have to think about with whom we want to work, who are the possible human resources which can help, which can participate, to have research which are the more inclusive as possible, to have a participatory process if it is possible. And the idea of partnership will help. We have to keep it in mind also because of we have to think of question of ethics and question of intellectual property. So these three conditions are very essential at the beginning of the stage. We have already to think about it. The context, the resources, the constraints in terms of resources, human and financial resources, and with whom we want to work, with whom we have to interact. So the question of partnership. And the last conditions is that when you have these first steps, you have to anticipate already where you are going to, what is the final step, and what kind of impact you can anticipate. Because if you do not anticipate the impact, it's difficult to get it and to already think about it and to anticipate and to have some to adapt to the methodology in order to improve. Let's be very concrete and take an example. We have from our research on Madagascar. We insist on 4 pillars of our methodological approach. First, we insist on the fact that the data production is very, very important, because we have, in order to get a relevant analysis, we have to know very well the context. We have to answer exactly to the question we ask. We don't use just second-hand data. So this is very important. The person we have to involve in this phase of data production is important. So in our principle, we involved a national system. Most of the time we work with the National Statistics Office in order to increase the ownership. So the data produced are public goods. It can be used by other persons. It can be institutionalized. So we can already think that we can anticipate that the impact of this data production, it will not be limited. Then we insist also of the idea of the training must be linked to all of this, because training is not only linked to the analysis phase. A person who would like to train must also participate in the data production. And the idea is also to train some person, some public officer in some public institutions in order to increase the impact of the project. The analytical phase must be linked directly to the data production. Most of the time in some projects, the person responsible for the analysis are not aware, are not very, doesn't know exactly how the data was produced, so they can misinterpret some results. They don't know exactly the conditions of the data production. So sometimes, it can lead to some irrelevant analysis. So this must be linked to the data production. And the last pillar is the question of dissemination information. This will be in another step for the training station, but we have already to think about it, because when you produce your data, when you produce your analysis, we have to already to think to whom it is I will present this analysis, and we have to adapt it. What is the audience of the results I will provide? And the idea is also to adapt and to think about the question we would like to answer, and in order to have a policy-oriented research, and it can improve the impact of the research.
Just a second, Mireille, sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yes? Yes?
The slides.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me, Zut.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, you can hear me now. It's just to ask you to click in the diaporama button. Yes, here. Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's better like this. Okay. But now I cannot move it to another.
Ouais. Remets-le normal.
I can't switch. I can't put. So how?
It's as if it were a regular presentation, no? Avec les flèches, ça va pas?
No,
we can get.
Bon, sorry.
Yeah, but now it's too late.
No, we cannot change it. Why it doesn't work?
Bon, le mieux est l'ennemi du bien.
Yes. So we have no access to.
Why? Okay. So let's just. It's okay like this, so I can switch every time. Okay, just a quick slide to show that we can have different types of stakeholders who can participate in the research, and it's important to think about these different types of stakeholders. It's, of course, it's the academic world with researchers, students, it is more classic, but we have also to think about some possible public officers who can participate in the project in a way or another. I will go back to this afterwards. We have to think also of the policymakers, maybe for the trainings or for the, they can also participate, or for the definition of some design of the methodology. I don't know, it depends. And the last point, and in our research, it's very, very important to think about ordinary citizens and civil society, because in order to improve the impact of the research, we have to think about how to communicate to the ordinary citizen, how to make it usable, the results usable by the ordinary citizen. Second point, we have different kind of potential impact, and we have to think about, again, I insist on the fact that we have to think and to anticipate it in order to make it happen. And we can have economic impact. I will give some very quick examples afterwards, but economic impact, of course, there will be some capacity building, some academic impact, institutional impact, social and political impact, and I have no specific example, but nowadays you have also to think about the environmental impact, even if the project is not especially on environment. So this is my last slide. The following slides will be for the illustration and just in case, but this is the main point, again, to think about these 4 conditions I would like to stress in this first presentation. The idea is the first, that we have to consider the impact, because research cannot be relevant if it doesn't take into account the context. Context means constraints or opportunities also. So we have to think about the human resources, the financial resources, some possible partnership in order to make the research the most relevant as possible. Then we have the output of the research. I don't know if you can see my what I show with the. We have the direct output. Sometimes we have the data, which is the public goods if we work with some public institutions, for example, for National Statistical Office. We can get methodology, some analysis, some reports, some training, but we can go beyond this direct output. One of the conditions to go beyond is the implication of different stakeholders at different steps of the project. We can think of implication of some local public institutions, or sometimes some institutions at the continental levels, some regional institutions which can disseminate, for example, the methodology, or to validate it, or to, I don't know, to reproduce it in other countries, something like that. We have also to work with the international institutions, not only because they can provide funds, but they can also work as bridge institutions and make the results of the research well known by other institutions. We have to work with the civil society, because there are some institutions who can use, there are the stakeholders who can be the stakeholders who can use the results of the research also. And And the implication of the different stakeholders is very important in order to get and to improve and increase the impact of the project. And let me just to finish to give some very quick example of the different type of impacts we already have during our research in different countries. So in terms of academic impact, for example, we can open a new field of research. We work a lot on governance issues, for example. 10 or 15 years ago, many persons told us that we can't work on corruption. We work on corruption, and we provide some specific methodology to measure corruption. So we were able to open a new field of research. The question of informal economy also, for example. This is a kind of academic impact. So we can get some methodological innovation or approach. This is a quick, very concrete impact. In terms of capacity building, my idea is here to insist more on, it's not only a question of training of some individuals. The idea is to provide a capacity building at the institutional or national level. The idea is to provide a transfer of methodology in one national institutions, for example. In terms of economic impact, we can think about the fact that the result of your research can allow the definition or the implementation of an effective policy, an effective measure, for example, to help some production unit in the informal sector, improvement of the living conditions of a specific category of the population. This is a concrete economic impact. At the institutional level, the institutional impact is when we, for example, strengthen on one specific institution, when we are able to, to improve their credibility or their legitimacy. For example, if they are able to produce some very useful and relevant data or to produce a very specific analysis. So we are able to have an institutional impact because we can strengthen one institution. And the last point is the question of social and political impact. For sure, some specific research can allow the empowerment of one specific group, because when we provide one specific knowledge, when you make, you are able to provide them a voice in order to defend their rights or their or to recognize some specific problems of one specific groups, it's very important. So this can be a social or political impact. And we have also, as a social science, social sciences, the idea is also to inform the democratic debate. So this is concretely a social and political impact. So I think I will stop there. And
just one comment now. I don't know who you are exactly, but maybe you are not at the stage of it.
François, please. Sorry, the mic. Can't hear you.
Okay. No, just to tell you that this presentation presents a cycle of research which is very ambitious. So maybe for some of you, you are beginning your career, so you are not able to have impacts at the national level, for example. But the idea is to have that in mind and to do your best to try to reach, and maybe in your research cycle, you will improve your impact progressively. But even if you are just beginning in the research field, it's important to have that in mind to try to orientate your activities to try to go to these goals. That was just my comment on this.
Okay, so we can stop there for the moment, and then let's have, if you don't have some questions, and we can maybe.
Right, and this very big picture. And like François said, we see a lot of ambition in this presentation, and actually that was my first reaction. Maybe if I can begin asking directly our young researchers, administrative staff that are with us today. Have you ever thought about working on that big picture? We have two people coming with us right now, Riti and Kri, but maybe I'm going to use it to ask maybe somebody, have you ever, when you work on a research project, like as a young researcher, do you think about that big picture in your level? Maybe Naret, can you react? I'm opening your mic. I'm not the animator anymore. François and Mireille, can you put me as the animator again?
So how do we do that?
Where is that on the screen?
I can try to do it. Wait. I can put myself here. Okay, I did it by myself.
Okay.
Okay, so I can cut the mic. I just choose Naret because, I mean, it's the first time I see that big picture. I don't know how Benjamin sees it, but it was very, very big and ambitious, and with a lot of ambition. Naret, for instance, I just choose you because you were the first one with us.
Hi everyone. My name is Naret. Actually, I'm not really professional with research field. I'm really young actually. I just started my master in international business, and before I joined with my manager, sister. Oh my God, sorry. In project WANASEA project as an assistant actually. And then now she chose me because she really busy with her job. And then I come here to join this. I graduated in economic, and like the presenter said, actually it's related to economic. I can see, and I'm really interested. Okay.
Thank you for trying, Naret. Thank you. Somebody else, who? Benjamin, something to. You have a degree.
Sure. Yes. Can I speak? Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. No, I had I think it's of course, but it's also very complete, which is interesting for us, for me at least. But I have also a question about the evaluation of the context, because you know, once you have written a project, once you have written a research proposal, you have had to describe the context of intervention, you have had to describe a methodology, some kind of collecting data, what kind of data you will collect, and then what kind of experimental procedure you're going to implement. But about this evaluation of the context, how researchers can have support.
Benjamin? Seems like we lost Benjamin. You there?
I'm here.
Yeah, you just said how researchers will have support.
Yes. My question is, how can researchers get support in order to...
We will never have the end of this question.
Shit.
I have some videos.
Okay. I'm gonna write it, okay?
Okay.
Other people? All questions.
Okay. Did you get it?
Get support from the institution to evaluate the context.
Yes. My interest here is how can we be sure that the demand for new knowledge exists, and how researchers, particularly researchers who are in rather weak institutions, can get support in order to evaluate the context of the implementation of their research.
Mirai or François, please, maybe?
Yes. On this, I think we are economists, so we think in terms of supply and demand. So what you are asking for, and when you are just beginning a project, the first thing is on the supply side is who and how are we being able to contact the project? Is the project feasible with human resources? Human resources, I mean other researchers, or usually you're not doing your research only by yourself, or you should think about how to collaborate with other researchers, because research is a collaborative process, and you are supposed to know the state of the art, and so discuss options others have elaborated on research on your research topic. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand is how to fund your research, how to find logistic assistance to implement your project. So the idea is to have a look on the fund possibilities, which change according to the countries. So that is the context on the one hand. And to try to sell your research and to making funded, you should think about the demand. So I go to the demand side. I mean, why your research should be useful and to who it should be useful. If you read, when you make your literature review at the beginning of the process, you have open questions which are not answered by the state of the art, and you want to push further the frontier of research. And so these give you an idea of to whom this kind of research, this production of knowledge may be useful. So you have to put that in your research project, and this, turning back to the supply, is the possibility to have a better appraisal of your own research project. So that would be my general answer to Benjamin's question. Mireille?
Yes, maybe to just add a complementary answer. I would say that the researchers, the group of researchers, has to identify maybe first some possible sources of information to make this first diagnosis. And when they identify the different sources of information, it could be some specific persons or some specific institutions or some, and identify also who are the existing institutions who have already worked on the subject, and to get in touch with them. And if necessary, maybe sometimes we need more funds to get access to some possible, I don't know, sources. Then we have to anticipate this, and then when it is clearly identified, I think it's more easy to get support, to get it. But if we just we are beginning from scratch, then we can just ask for support if we did not yet identify who are the possible sources of information.
So maybe to give you a concrete example, usually when one wants to implement a research project, we are thinking about academic source of funding. And so there are different schemes in different countries. But if we think in terms of stakeholder, as Mireille put it in her presentation, I will take the example of research on the informal economy or informal sector. We're specialists on this. I've been working on this since many years. So the idea is, the first point is, let's try to see what sort of academic funding scheme would be able to fund our research. But if we think in terms of stakeholders, we can think about donors. Donors are interested in policy making to try to improve, for example, the condition, the working condition, or the productivity of the informal workers, or to make the informal integration, informal economy more inclusive. So donors is a possibility outside the academic field, and they've got the money. We can think also of, for example, the patronal association. Usually the formal sector and their organization are claiming that the informal sector is competing disloyally with the formal sector, and they are taking markets, and it's not justified. And so they could be also interested in funding a research to know more about the informal sector, and after that to discuss the conclusion for action. And maybe a last point, which is not so relevant in the case of informal workers because they usually are poor, but the ones who are the targets of your research may be also interested in helping, assisting, supporting, and why not funding your research, because it will be directly helpful for them to raise their voice and as an advocacy instrument. So that's for a concrete example on how to try to anchor your research outside, inside first, but also outside the academic field and the institution which can support your research.
Especially on this, how do you do directly and how do you manage? You go show your project, research project to them? How do you contact them at the first place, actually? Please.
Of course, when you contact a donor or a possible institution which can provide some funds for your research, you have to go you have to go there with already some, at least, a document with a presentation of first diagnosis of what you have and where you go, what is the objective of your research, and what are the previous work you have already done related directly or indirectly with the subject, the topic of the research you would like to fund. And I think this is the only way is sometimes you have to contact them directly, sometimes it's to answer to some call for project or something like that. But most of the time, in our case, we think that it could be useful to contact them directly, because sometimes the specificity of your research it's more easy to convince someone instead of answering some very global call for proposals.
And maybe one last comment is, I just mentioned the different potential stakeholders to fund the research. But you can think about the support of the research if we keep in the academic field, showing that we have embarked, and I'm taking again the example of the informal sector, informal workers. And so just showing in the research proposal that we have embarked here, Informal Workers Association, in our project, saying that they are interested and that it can be useful for them. It's also a way to improve the probability to get support from academic institutions to fund your research.
Thank you. Back to the participants again. Any reaction here in the room? And don't talk, Benjamin. Somebody here. You know, next week you're going to be in the room with Benjamin. So he's going to ask you much more questions. You can take the risk. He's going to be very hard on you. Where is Kong? He has left. Huang, somebody? Otherwise, if there are no questions, we're gonna close the session. So we have shy people with us today. No questions written. And last call. So thank you, everyone. It was just like we said, testimonies, and we wanted to listen to Mireille and François' research profiles, and thanking them actually for the effort and the time they gave us. What I want to say is, please, just hoping you enjoyed it, even if you're like very shy today. Hope you'll enjoy the training session next week. You can be confident. We're here like to learn from you. Maybe you're learning something too, but I mean, nobody has like the global knowledge. If you need something, if you have other questions later, don't hesitate to write, mail us. We're here. Benjamin, even I guess François and Mireille, they can help if needed. Thank you for your time. François et Mireille, merci beaucoup, beaucoup, beaucoup. It's not that easy to talk like just in front of a camera and with a mic.
Maybe one last word before closing the session. It's just an advice from an old researcher who is going to die soon. We were on the issue, on the content, but I think one very important thing is to raise your own voice as a researcher, because there is no research without critiques. Usually, and we have been working in Vietnam for 5 years and many other countries in Latin America or Africa, young researchers, they take for granted what the old one tell them. And this is not scientific approach. The scientific approach is to have constructive criticism, not take for granted what is said, see where are the weaknesses, and you are the one to raise questions, and don't hesitate in this. And for sure, next week, if you don't do that, I think that we will come back to you and just tell you, you should change.
Thank you. Thank you. Raise your own voice.
And one last point, my last word is on ambition. Be ambitious. I think some young researchers say that maybe it's not possible. I think everything is possible. Maybe sometimes you have some constraints, but if you have the ambition and the will to succeed, to get to the objective, you can find the fund and you can convince different stakeholders to participate, to help you, to provide support in a way or another. And so you can succeed.
Can I speak?
Yes, of course, Benjamin.
To anticipate a bit next week, I see that you're being quite shy here now, but next week, because I'm a very lazy man, you only will speak, because I don't know anything about research, so the only ones who have knowledge about how to implement research projects are you. So the only thing I'm going to do is question you, and you will have to talk. We organized 4 groups of people trying to balance a little bit the experience in life and the disciplines, and you will be asked to share what you have learned through the implementation of your projects. So this is how it will happen. So I hope you won't be as shy as today. And but as François said, anyway, we expect you to raise your voice, and if you don't, you will suffer a lot from us. I can tell you.
Maybe they will suffer, but what I ask the young researcher for next week is make you suffer. So we are ready to pay everybody, or every question is criticizing question to try to know more. We will pay in hard currency.
No pain, no gain. Yeah.
And please enjoy it. You can have some pleasure in it. and you have to get together. Thank you to all of you, and just raise your voice. Raise your voice. Bye bye. Take care.
Bye. See you next week.
Everybody. Thank you.
Che li abbraccio.
Bye bye.
Até logo.